Hey everyone, welcome to this week's edition of Laying the Leadership Foundation podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Poole. Stephanie's not going to be joining us today, but we do have a special guest, Amanda Ekabutr. I hope I got that right there. I know right before we went on, I was trying to make sure I got that right, but thank you so much for joining us today, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be on this podcast with you.
So obviously you and I got to know each other a little bit through the NCAA Leadership Academy Workshop, which for those who are listening or have skipped a couple episodes, that has been a recurring theme. It's the NCAA law program, as we call it. So we were in group 2 together in the first module, which was really exciting. We had lots of good people in that group, and you're one of them. So I've enjoyed getting to know you over the past, I guess, month and a half, 2 months, whatever it's been now in this lockdown time. But I guess tell me a little bit about how you ended up at UMass Amherst and the job you were in. I know you have a little bit of a winding path, so I'm curious to see your different stops and how that's influenced you over your time and your way to Amherst.
Yeah, for sure. And yes, shout out to NCAA law and shout out to Group 2, the best group out there. Just kidding, but not really.
Yeah, we are
But
really the
yes,
best group.
we really are actually. But yeah, great question. So, in terms of my past and just how I got into college athletics, I would say that my journey has been very non-linear. I was a former junior college basketball student athlete at in Scottsdale Community College in Scottsdale, Arizona. I unfortunately didn't go on to play on like how I envisioned, but that is completely okay. I continued on with my education though, and I was at junior college for about another year, just finishing up my associates. And then I transferred to Arizona State to pursue my education in exercise and wellness. I thought, oh, well, I love, basketball and working out. Let me just go exercise and wellness. Was it something I kind of really wanted to do as a passion or a career? Maybe not so much, but I was able to get heavily involved at Arizona State, fell in love with my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and really was provided a lot of mentorship through it. And I did have a marketing internship with the Arizona State women's basketball team with marketing a little bit. And then I graduated in 2014. So when I graduated, I had no idea what I was going to do. I was juggling around between, helping my mom with her Thai buffet restaurant to working as a waitress at another job. I was with the Suns a little bit on the marketing street team, and I coached youth basketball. And a reason why I think I did so much was to fill that void of not having something. And especially, having that student athlete mentality, you're always on the go and used to doing something. So when I didn't have that, I was just trying to fill that void. But I did have the opportunity to be in higher education spaces as an enrollment advisor for Arizona State and a finance counselor. So that was great experience for me, but it wasn't filling my cup. And I really had to think, what is it that makes me happy? Where do I want to be? And I wanted to just be in the ins and outs of athletics. I didn't really know what that looked like, but I have a great mentor, Alonzo Jones at Arizona State, who is the director of Championship and Inclusion Life. And I had a meeting with him. I was like, AJ, I just don't know what I want to do. I want to work in athletics. I, maybe want to be a high school athletic director, but had no idea if that was even a possibility or what that route would even look like. So he was looking at my resume. And so happens there's a call from Jason Thomas, who was the director of Beyond Football at the time, or at least worked with football at Oregon State, and called AJ while I'm meeting with him. And, AJ expressed that I have this, amazing girl here who's a hard worker and wants to get into athletics. Do you have an opportunity available? JT, because of the relationship with AJ, said, yeah, how does she feel about relocating? And I'm over here on the phone with him, just trying to get my resume looked at. And he's telling me like, oh, have you ever thought about Oregon? I haven't even heard of Oregon State. I always knew about the Ducks at the time. But it was offered, the position was offered to be a graduate assistant for Beyond Football for Oregon State specifically. And he said, send me your resume. And the rest was history. Got off the phone with him and looked at AJ. And I said, AJ, what in the world just happened just now? And he said, that's the stars and the moon for you. So I ended up, living at Oregon State, or living, in Oregon, and doing student athlete development for football. And to provide a little bit more context, so when I graduated in 2014, I worked for about 3 years doing all those different, occupations that I did.
Yep.
And then had to go back to school, which was a huge transition for me, like APA format. I don't even remember what that even means or what that looks like, but I knew that there was something greater in store for me. And I knew that, athletics was an opportunity for me. And I was grateful that that was provided for me. So fast forward again, I'm at Oregon State, fell absolutely in love with student athlete development and helping student athletes just develop and think about outside their athletic identity. Because as you can see from my story, I just had a whole transition and was exposed to who I really was outside of my sport. And I just wanted to provide that and uncover that within other student athletes. And there was a time, unfortunately, where I lost my funding after my first year of working in athletics, and I had to figure out how in the world was I going to finish my second year program. I had thought about maybe I could transfer, but Oregon State's a quarter school and other schools are semesters. Like, would I even be able to transfer a lot of the stuff that I did? So it was a definitely hard time. I would say that was the hardest time for me. And I almost got to the point where I was like, you know what, maybe this was just an opportunity for me to just be in the space for a little bit, maybe just a year, and then go back and then figure out what I'm going to do back in Arizona. But luckily, with the relationships and the involvement that I have on campus in student affairs, I was offered an ethnic studies graduate teaching assistantship that luckily paid for my last year. And because of the involvement that I had with athletics, I was able to still be so involved and do student athlete development for all teams. Mm. And then, I graduated in June, and I was applying for everything in the world under the sun. I didn't care what it was. And I applied for this director of student athlete development position at UMass, and I got it in July. So, it was really just, I'm really big on mentioning that if you are passionate, if you are a hard worker, if you're innovative and you're willing to put in the grind and the work, like everything else will pay itself forward. So now I went from Arizona to Oregon. So I went from the heat to the rain. Now I'm in the winter snow.
Well, literally right now in the snow. As there's,
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but we got 12 inches down in Springfield. So,
oh my gosh, yeah, I haven't even measured it outside. I just haven't even gone outside because of the snow. But yeah, so it was an interesting transition for me because I was an intern at Oregon State. Going from an intern to supervising 7 interns, was a big transition for me, and just learning my role and dealing with imposter syndrome, like, am I even good enough to be in this space? I just went straight to a director position. Like, that's kind of unheard of. I don't know if I could do it, but, again, just recognizing and remembering my work ethic and, how much I'm such a learner and wanting to soak up information. I was able to, implement a lot of different things during the time. The position had been vacant for about 2 years.
oh wow.
So I kind of had to start from ground up, get feedback from student athletes, build that rapport, and really see what the needs were from our student athletes. But as I had mentioned, I had been an ethnic studies graduate teaching assistantship, whether it was in Asian American studies, race and ethnicity. And I had always already been really passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion work, and really providing spaces, whether it's for students and student athletes. Pretty much what I was doing a lot of work at Oregon State. And when I came to UMass, I saw the need and knew the importance of having those spaces. So I was already in the works of providing those spaces. And, I can say thankfully that we did already have spaces provided. We had a diversity, equity, inclusion committee with staff and coaches and student athletes and even students that were on it, just so that we can get that campus perspective. And then unfortunately, in the midst of the unfortunate killings of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, we really had to, focus on that work. Not that that work wasn't focused on, because again, I was already passionate about it and knew that that was something that needs to be on the forefront, whether it's over the summer or virtual or in person. So I luckily was able to get and fortunately was able to get a promotion as diversity inclusion officer. And now I'm just doing a lot of work around that and collaborations with campus. I know that that was a lot of information about my past. That was just one question, but I hope that kind of, gives a little background and insight of my journey to athletics.
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, to me, one of the things that keeps popping up, it seems, in your journey is obstacles and opportunity. And I
Hmm.
think that that's something that obviously all of us go through in our different career paths and life in general. But I guess I want to back up to even the beginning. Scottsdale, you mentioned you're a
Yes.
women's basketball player. Most people don't know I was a women's basketball coach as my first professional job at Division II institution in New Mexico. So
Nice. Didn't know that.
yeah, I respect you with that and wanting to play after college and junior college as well. But I guess, especially now that you're in the student athlete development and DEI sectors, I guess, how was that experience of you wanting to play even after Scottsdale to not having the opportunity? How do you think that helps you relate to your student athletes, whether it be with what they're currently going through now or what even after college? We obviously know that not everyone is able to go to the professional route, but how do you
Mhm.
think your experience with that is able to help the student athletes that you work with currently?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. And I really think about, I mean, let's think about it. When we have transfers from junior colleges, like I know the type of support that they had, if they had much support at that, and really being able to let them know that, outside of this, eventually, your knees might hurt a little bit. You can't jump how you used to. Doesn't mean you can't still be in sport because clearly we're still pursuing our passions of working in athletics, but in a different capacity.
Yep.
And I think that, for me, it took someone, well, one, I didn't even think that I could play college, whether it was junior college level or what. But it took for someone to see something in me and say, hey, you need to go and, try out for somewhere or go play somewhere. And although things didn't work out for me to continue on playing, it made me focus on what other opportunities are out there, like you had mentioned, whether it was academics or other organizations on campus, because I feel that maybe if I did end up playing somewhere, I probably wouldn't have been exposed to all those amazing people or organizations that I had got involved in at or Arizona State.
Mm.
So really just letting them know that, you can do everything that you're doing now, but let's add on to that and, make you be a even more well-rounded person. Like there's so many things that our student athletes don't see within themselves that they really just need someone to say, hey, I think you would be a great sports reporter. Or I think that you can do poetry. Like, because they don't hear that. It's more like, hey, you could shoot a basketball very well. Or like, you can hit that ball far past, home base or whatever the case may be. So not home base, excuse me, like third base, second base. But
Home plate, wherever you
yeah,
say.
yeah, wherever. So I'm really big on, and I've shared my motto, and I've adopted it from Custody Amato because I'm a huge fan of boxing. I love boxing, and I did compete a little bit
Okay.
in grad school. I don't know what I was thinking trying to do that in grad school while
You're
doing
there for
everything.
have some fun. That's stress relief. That's what it could be, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. But Custody Amato, for those who don't know, is Mike Tyson's first trainer that got him out of Brooklyn. And one of the quotes that he said was, "I don't create, I discover, and I uncover." And that resonated with me so much because I'm not here to shape people into something that they're not. Like they're already the people that they are. They just need to discover that within themselves and uncover it, and then they're gonna blossom into the amazing people that they are. They just need that someone to help guide them. So yeah, so I feel like with that experience from a junior college level is just relating with the student athletes, but also putting a lot more important emphasis on knowing that you're so much more than that student athlete,
Yep.
as we always preach. Yeah.
You mentioned the social unrest that we had this past summer, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor. I know that that's obviously um, the events that unfolded were tragic in multiple different ways, especially with the death of all three of those. And as someone who wants to be supportive of everyone, regardless of skin color, background, whatever it is, um, I think it's important to talk about it, obviously, especially from, I find that I do have, I'm not able to relate to African Americans, Blacks, Hispanics, anyone else outside of my own understanding, and I will never fully understand. But I guess from your perspective, what did you see with the UMass Amherst community, and what were you able to work with them on during your time at UMass to talk and bring some of these things to the discussion where some people might not be as open and willing to share their different parts of their upbringing, I guess.
For sure. Of course it wasn't easy during that time because this, the sad reality of it is that none of this is new.
Hmm.
Like this stuff has been going on. I just think that COVID has really forced us to pause and be present and pay attention to the reality of how our society is. But I would say that I am so grateful and thankful that I have an athletic department that is so supportive of me and values me. I feel like in terms of, making sure that we are holding each other accountable when it comes to DEI work, but making sure that we're supporting our student athletes that, come from those different backgrounds. Of course there's, it's tough because you can never force someone to want to learn and be willing to talk and have those uncomfortable conversations, but it's a step. And I'm a big proponent about, those who want to make a difference and make an impact, and have these conversations will be there.
Hmm.
And those who don't, that's like, it's like with anything, some people will be about it, some of them won't. But it's about the ones who are there, that you really need to focus on. Don't focus so much on numbers, focus on impact.
Yep.
And I think with, those who are present, you never know. I'm really big on reaching out and touching other people, but if you can't reach or touch that person, maybe someone else that you touched can do it. So right now we're working in our UMass Athletics Racial and Social Justice Plan. And I like to say that, although I have the title of Diversity and Inclusion Officer, please don't look at me as the Diversity Inclusion Officer. I take a lot of pride in it, but essentially all of us need to be diversity inclusion officers. It can't just be on one person. I like to say I'm the accountability buddy. I'm the one that says, hey, like you said that you were going to say, do this, and what's the update on it? Or, have you made progress? Or, just really keeping things always at the forefront of the decisions that we make, making sure that, of course, we're being inclusive and providing that access and those resources to all of our student athletes, but looking around the room and seeing who's missing that needs to be, in those spaces when we make those types of decisions.
Yep. And I fully agree. And it's more about the people who are there and who are willing to change than the people who we can't control.
Hmm.
Not saying that we can control the people who are in the room with us when we're talking, but at least we can share those experiences and have those open and honest conversations and welcoming spaces for everyone and inclusion of what we talked about with NCAA law programs and when we're building these leadership programs to really make sure that they are inclusive. I think
Hmm.
that that's one of the things to where I remember the first time I really had, or I guess social justice hit closer to home for me was being from St. Louis was the Trayvon Martin
Mm.
shooting.
Mhm.
Granted, I had just moved to New Mexico at that point, so I wasn't in the city, but just seeing how all that influenced the area of St. Louis and everything that happened to it definitely made my eyes open up a little bit more to the different injustices that were going on around. And as now that we're starting to see athletic departments include the DEI role or position within their department, I guess how has your position changed since you had the promotion to what it was before?
Yeah, I would say, there's for sure an extra added pressure of like you are the designated one to make sure that our department is diverse, equitable, and inclusive. But I think it's giving myself grace through all this because even within myself, I'm going to make mistakes. But giving myself in grace throughout this work because this work can be tiring and exhausting, and you will have fatigue from it, but what I would say has changed is more so on like really having buy-in and really having the drive to be able to do what I want to see happen in the department. Beforehand it was, I was creating the spaces because I knew the spaces were needed, but now like I can mandate this. Like I can really have a voice and bring in or at least my thoughts and perspectives on what needs to happen and, just be adamant about it. Whereas beforehand it was more so like, oh, maybe, she seems right, or, that would be a good idea, which again, I've had great buy-in and, support from my department, from the AD down on doing the work. So now it's just, making sure that we're putting things into action. We have conversations and then it's putting things into action and then looking at and then replacing or improving policies that are in place. So that's kind of my thought process and, how I would say this responsibility has brought to me. And of course, now I have the additional component of not just student athletes, I have staff and coaches.
Yep.
That I have to also try to make sure that they're, at least being, culturally competent to a level where they can best serve and support, student athletes from different backgrounds. So, that's an extra added layer. But I heavily lean on campus folks and campus partners. As I mentioned, like when athletics, had me in limbo for those 6 to 7 months financially, who was there for me, academic folks, student affairs,
Yep.
I have a very special place in my heart for, student affairs and, essentially student athlete development. I always say is student affairs. We just have a specific cohort and that's student athletes. And of course you have to understand how the athletic experience is a little bit because, athletics is a little bit different compared to other jobs and just a little. Yeah.
Just a little bit.
So yeah, that's what I would say have been like my extra added responsibilities for my position.
Well, moving on from all of that to how we got to know each other was the NCAA law program. So we're recording this on February 3rd, I think it is now. 2nd, sorry. I'm a day ahead of myself. But I guess, so we've been through module 1, which was a lot of learning about the theories and some, I won't say ground level stuff because it's a lot more than ground level, but things that allow us to put our formation down for creating this student leadership program, or I guess a coach's leadership program, or however, whatever you decide to design. I guess what were some of your big key takeaways from the first module that you've started to implement there at UMass?
Mm-hmm. Ooh, that's a loaded question because we learned so much, we read so much.
Yeah, I know.
um,
It seems like every time Stephanie and I get on one of these podcasts, it's like that first module. It's like every night for 3 hours, they would just dump all this information on us. And it's like analysis paralysis. Just like 48 hours after, it's like, okay, we got to unpack all this, and then start to see some of those things click. Because I know one of the things that we're building a lot on is the social change model and servant leadership. So those were two of the big things that we took away from the first module.
Yeah, definitely. For us, I think a huge thing, and shout out to my amazing right hand teammate, my left hand, my foot, my everything teammate. Yeah, everything teammate Liz Hamlet, who works in academics with both basketball teams. I think a big takeaway for us and a huge part that we love, although we have been virtual, is the connection piece. Like I wouldn't have been able to know you and everyone else that is in our cohort, but knowing that every institution is going to be different for sure, and that everyone's at different levels, and what might work for one institution may not or be a need for your institution. But also in terms of understanding that it can't just be two people doing this work. We see how much work and just effort is needed to put and really launch a successful leadership academy workshop is leadership academy is really needed. But there's been a lot of readings for us, and I think that we're trying to start small, but trying to be realistic at the same time in terms of just getting buy-in from our student athletes. So we're really focusing on the community piece, but also making sure that we're developing our student athletes as leaders, but also focusing on the ones that I think it goes back to the inclusive design. really understanding that we need to be inclusive when we're talking about our leadership, and having our leadership represent our full and whole student athlete population. Typically we have SAC. I mean, we do have SAC, which has our well-known leaders from each team on there. So we're really trying to target and seek those who might be on the fence of like, am I a leader? Am I not? And really helping develop them, because sometimes SAC not takes away, but has opportunities for those who are already recognized as leaders on their team, and we just want to provide that opportunity as well, in a different sense, and provide that community and family base to that. We have our vision, since we are a flagship university, is an acronym of FLAG. So family, leadership, authenticity, and grit. Like that's going to be our first focus for our Leadership Academy. So crossing fingers that it'll just play through, as we've heard in law, that what you envision can probably change so many times. And I think in this COVID time, we're probably, change is inevitable at this point, and we're always going to change. But I would say those are my main things. And really leaning on our co-facilitators.
Mm-hmm.
I look at them as goats, like all of them, and just they have been facilitating law for several years now. They've seen so many different institutions start from the ground up, and like see academies come to fruition. So heavily relying on the people, or leaning on, excuse me, our co-facilitators and people like yourself. Like, hey, what's going on at AIC? What do you guys have going on? What's working? What's not working? So those would be like my favorite parts, and my main takeaways from module 1. At least I think I kind of talked about just law in its entirety, but
I mean, we've only had 1 week of module 2, so that's completely fine.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, one of the interesting things, so we had Jeff on a couple episodes ago, and I thought it was interesting. So he was actually a part of creating the law program for the NCAA, which I didn't know until that interview. And he's like, in the first year or two, there were so many people who applied for the program and came through, and they thought it was here's an NCAA kit of a leadership development course, take it back to your school or university and just implement it. And he said that was one of the biggest obstacles they had to overcome in those first few years, is instead of it being here's a kit, figure it out and go, of convincing people that the right way to go was actually being unique for each campus, because unique campuses exist for every single one of the NCAA institutions. I think that once again goes back to the inclusion aspect of it. You can't have an inclusive program if it's just here's a kit and go. So I just thought that was very interesting from a couple weeks ago. And then I know I talked to Lamar, I guess it was early January, about the Ice Tank Challenge. Had a couple questions. He goes, "That's really the moment of where you get to the top of a hill and everything else tends to just fall with it." And so for those who aren't in the law program or who haven't been through the Ice Tank Challenge, so each university or each school was given a scenario of what was going on, type of leadership program, if there was one there, different things about the university, about supportive ADs, or just all this information thrown at you and said, create a 6-slide, 15-minute PowerPoint about the leadership academy that you would put in for this university. So I guess, Amanda, what were your thoughts, and were there any of those aha moments, or what did you learn about what you're doing in the Ice Tank Challenge that you look forward to bringing to campus when you present your proposal?
Yeah, for sure. So we had a lot of similarities. I mean, I think when, there's not, I mean, one of our scenario was, there wasn't a leadership academy set in place. There wasn't a foundation for it. And it was based off of like each team would kind of do their own thing, which is kind of the same for us. So we pretty much kind of mirrored like our suggestions from what we already created. But what I've noticed even from other people's presentations is that there's a lot of similarities. Like you need to have buy-in from everybody, whether it's administration, coaches, staff, student athletes. Bam. You need to have campus partner collaborations, because again, all hands on deck, and making sure that we lean on each other. And then also just providing more structure and providing what the commitment will be, because again, we all know that scheduling is so hard, And getting the buy-in has been a big part of that because everyone's just so busy, and we all know that and we're aware of that. But adding to and catering to what the coaches want and the student athletes, because again, we're providing something that they also want. Like, it's not something that we're just like, hey, you need to do this. Like, no, we're doing this because you said, XYZ. So really catering again to the needs and wants of the institution. So I would say, yeah, it was helpful to know that I think it just normalizes the fact that everyone is trying to do this. And I think, well, that's what I love about law, is that we really all are in this together. Like, hey,
Yeah.
how's your thing going? Have you launched it yet? Oh no, we haven't done that yet. Yeah, we're still struggling. Yeah, we're struggling too. So yeah, I think it's just the journey in itself. But I thought the ice team challenge was great. I think it would have been awesome if we could have used our own,
Yep.
and then, because then we would have got direct feedback from other cohort members, and from our lead guide facilitators on what it is we could change specifically. But I know that that's what we have our lead facilitators, is to review that with them. But I thought it was a great assignment for us.
Awesome. Well, as we begin to wrap up here, I guess, in what you're looking forward to with UMass and implementing your leadership program, I guess, what do you see as a challenge or two that you're going to have to overcome that you're excited about facing?
Ooh, I like how you flipped it at the end. I am excited about facing, again, I think it's just the buy-in, but really, it's almost like it is a sales, but not a sales pitch because we're not selling anything, but it's a pitch to our student athletes, because our student athletes kind of deflect a lot when it's another thing added onto their schedule. But I love just providing the benefits that they can reap from the Leadership Academy, and then being excited to kind of challenge them, like, hey, if this first Leadership Academy session is like straight trash, you will never have to come back again. And that's sometimes what I'll do with my programs, because at the end of the program, I have confidence enough that we will make sure this program is engaging enough for them where they will want more. Because then after the end of that session, I'm going to say, how was that? How was that session? And they're say, I guess it was cool. And then, you got them from there. So
And if you
just
can
the
get that,
challenge of that.
if you can get that reaction, that's like the mountaintops for most of the student athletes I interact with. Yeah, I'm not going to admit it, but
Right,
yeah,
exactly. So that's one thing. But also the challenge of just, seeing one thing, start from, stones and rocks and be built up by brick, and then be this, this thing that is a well recognized program at UMass. That's the high top goal. So yeah, that's something that will be a challenge, but that I am excited for.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me this week. And wrapping up, I'm Thomas Poole, and thanks for joining me, Amanda.
Thanks, Thomas.